"Why'd you abandon us, David?" Zolani, a fierce black woman, demanded, her voice trembling with a decade's pain as she faced David in the Sapphire Room's shadowed wine cellar. Moments before, David, hiding behind his Marcus Hale alias, had met her gaze with familiar eyes that feigned ignorance, denying he was the husband who'd forsaken her. The Chicago restaurant's opulence shattered under her righteous fury, her spirit unbroken despite racist slurs branding her the help. This electrifying clash unveils a gripping saga of betrayal and prejudice, exposing a scammer's cruel heart. What drove David to forsake his black wife and sons for a lavish lie? How will Zolani, a black woman haunted by hardship, triumph? And what bold move will topple his empire? Dive into this tale of justice and redemption. Subscribe for the latest empowering stories and share where you're watching from. Stay for twists that will leave you stunned. Every second reveals a secret you won't believe. Zolani Nkosi glided through the opulent dining room of the Sapphire Room, her black uniform a stark contrast to the shimmering chandeliers that dangled like diamond constellations above the mahogany tables. The air was thick with the scent of seared foie gras and aged Bordeaux, a world of extravagance that mocked her every step. At 32, with skin the color of polished ebony and eyes that held the depth of Lake Michigan's storms, Zolani had mastered the art of invisibility in this realm of Chicago's elite. She was the shadow that served, the unseen force ensuring their evenings unfolded flawlessly, while her own life unraveled thread by thread back home. Tonight, the weight of it all pressed harder than usual. Her cheap heels pinched her feet, a constant reminder of the bills piling up like autumn leaves on her kitchen table. Elijah and Lucas, her 10-year-old twin sons, the beating heart of her existence, the reason she pushed through each exhausting shift, needed new school uniforms. Elijah's asthma inhaler was running low again, and the copay at the pharmacy felt like a thief in the night. They were her everything. Those boys. Elijah with his quiet intelligence, always buried in books borrowed from the library, and Lucas with his boundless energy, dreaming of soccer fields he rarely got to play on. They were the light in her darkness, the legacy of a love that had burned bright and then vanished in flames. As she approached table 12, a group of white investors in tailored suits discussing real estate deals over $50 appetizers, one of them, a silver-haired man with a Rolex glinting under the lights, barely glanced up. "We'll have the caviar to start," he said, his voice clipped, as if speaking to her was an inconvenience. But when Zolani reached for the water pitcher, his companion, a younger man with a smug grin, leaned back and waved her away. "No, no," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "We'll wait for someone else. You know, the help like you isn't quite right for this table." The words landed like a slap. The help echoing the racist undercurrents she'd faced too many times. Solani froze, her cheeks burning, the room spinning slightly as the other guests pretended not to notice. The manager, a harried woman named Claire, pulled her aside moments later. "Take the rest of the night off, Solani. We can't afford complaints from regulars." Suspended for the shift, unpaid, just like that. Another blow in a life full of them. She stepped out into the chilly Chicago evening, the wind whipping through the skyscrapers like a cruel whisper. The L train ride home was a blur of fluorescent lights and strangers' faces, her mind racing through the mental calculator that never stopped. Rent due in 5 days, groceries stretching thin, and now this lost wage. How would she explain to the boys? They were old enough to sense when things were tight, Elijah's worried eyes always scanning her face for signs of stress, Lucas trying to cheer her up with his infectious laughter. They deserved better than this constant scramble, better than a mother who came home bone-tired, her uniform smelling of other people's luxury. Her apartment building on the south side was a crumbling relic, paint peeling like old skin, the elevator perpetually out of order. Climbing the 3 flights of stairs, Solani felt the familiar ache in her legs, a reminder of the double shifts she'd pulled just to keep the lights on. The door to her 2-bedroom unit creaked open, revealing the modest space she'd made into a home. Second-hand furniture patched with love, drawings from the boys pinned to the fridge, and the faint scent of Namusa's homemade injera wafting from across the hall. Namusa Rodriguez, her 67-year-old neighbor from South Africa, was more than a babysitter. She was the guardian angel Solani hadn't known she needed. With gray hair twisted into neat cornrows and eyes that held the wisdom of surviving apartheid, Namusa had stepped into their lives 3 years ago, watching the boys during Solani's late nights without ever asking for payment. "Those children are my joy," she'd say, her voice warm as the African sun she missed. Tonight, Namusa was in Solani's kitchen, stirring a pot of stew she'd brought over, the boys already at the table with homework spread out. Elijah looked up first, his brown eyes, mirrors of his father's, lighting up. "Mom, you're early." Lucas bounded over for a hug, his energy undimmed despite the long day. Solani forced a smile, kissing their foreheads, the softness of their curls a brief balm against the world's harshness. "Just a slow night at work," she lied, not wanting to burden them. Namusa caught her eye, her weathered face knowing. "Sit, Mntwanawami. Eat. You've been on your feet too long." As Zolani sank into a chair, Namusa shared a story from her youth in Johannesburg, how she'd fled the brutality of apartheid with nothing but hope, building a new life in America despite the stares and slurs. "We women of color, we endure," Namusa said, her hand on Zolani's shoulder. "But endurance isn't forever. One day the tide turns." Zolani nodded, but her thoughts drifted to the bills stacked on the counter. Elijah's asthma had flared up last month, and the emergency room visit was a $500 hole in her budget. She'd skipped meals to cover it, eating crackers in the break room at work while serving plates worth her weekly wage. The irony stung. In the Sapphire room, she poured wines that cost more than her rent. Yet back home, she counted pennies for milk and bread. She glanced at the drawer where she kept the old wedding ring, the one the police had handed her 10 years ago, charred from the fire that supposedly claimed David's life. That ring was all she had left of him, the man who'd swept her off her feet in college, ignoring his family's racist whispers about cultural differences. They'd married in a small ceremony, her heart full of dreams, his promises of a better future ringing in her ears. But then the call came. Accident on Highway 94, vehicle through the guardrail, fire too intense. Officer Martinez stood at her door, hat in hand, delivering the words that shattered her world when she was 22 and 8 months pregnant. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole. There wasn't much left to recover." The twins had arrived 6 weeks early, premature but fighters, just like their mother. No life insurance. David's policy had lapsed during a tight period. No savings, just grief, and 2 tiny humans depending on her. The first years were a blur of sleepless nights, formulas she stretched with water, and jobs that barely covered childcare. Cashier, cleaner, receptionist, anything to keep them fed. Landing the Sapphire Room gig 5 years ago had been a lifeline. Better tips from the demanding clientele. But the demands came with humiliation, like tonight's incident. Solani pushed the memory away, focusing on the boys' laughter as Lucas recounted his day at school, Elijah quietly finishing math problems. They were her anchors, the reason she rose each morning despite the exhaustion etching lines on her face. As Namusa left, promising to check in tomorrow, Zolani tucked the boys into bed, reading them a story from a worn library book. Elijah snuggled close, his breathing steady despite the wheeze that worried her. "Good night, Mom," Lucas murmured, his energy finally spent. In the quiet, Zolani sat by the window, staring at the city lights twinkling like distant stars. Chicago was a city of dreams for some, nightmares for others. For her, it was survival, a daily battle against poverty, prejudice, and the ghost of a husband who'd left her to face it alone. Little did she know that the ghost was about to resurface, bringing with it a storm that would test her strength like never before. Solani pushed through the Sapphire Room's polished doors, the sting of last night's racist dismissal, a white patron's sneer branding her, the help, still raw. Her worn heels bit into her feet, a reminder of bills for Elijah's inhaler and Lucas's school supplies. At 32, she navigated the opulent dining room with practiced grace, her smile a shield against the affluent crowd's indifference. The air shimmered with chandelier light, tables gleaming with crystal glasses, but her mind was on her twins. Elijah's quiet curiosity, Lucas's boundless energy, her anchors in a relentless grind. Serving table one, a group of investors with a skyline view, Solani froze. One man, gold-flecked eyes and a scar above his eyebrow, was David, her husband, dead 10 years in a staged crash, now alive as Marcus Hale. Memories surged. Their wedding at 22, her pregnancy, his promises of forever, then the police's call. Fire, charred ring, empty casket. Grief had crushed her, birthing the twins alone, scraping by while mourning a ghost. David's gaze met hers, a flicker of recognition buried in a stranger's smile. He ordered casually, as if she were nothing, his voice slicing through her. Solani's hand trembled, nearly dropping her tray of wine glasses, her heart pounding. Was this a trick of exhaustion? She'd seen his face in dreams, but the scar, the tilt of his head, were real. A white patron nearby muttered, "Project servers don't belong here," the slur echoing her daily battles, bank denials, suspicious stares. Rage and pain collided, her breath catching. She cornered him near the bar area, away from the dining room center, the opulence of mahogany tables and chandeliers mocking her turmoil. Solani, face etched with anguish, a few tears glistening on her cheeks, gripped her tray, her eyes blazing as she confronted him, demanding why he'd abandoned them for a decade. David stepped back, panic flickering in his eyes, his red suit stark against the white tablecloths, now lightly stained with spilled wine like blood. Wealthy white patrons whispered, their glances sharp, while servers in matching white shirts and black bow ties watched, blurred in the tension. Solani retreated to the wine cellar, her breath ragged against stone walls, the scent of oak grounding her. How could he live while she'd mourned, while Elijah wheezed and Lucas wore hand-me-downs? Maria, another server, found him, concern in her eyes. Solani brushed it off, but resolve hardened. She needed answers, not for lost love, but for stolen years. At home, the L train's hum blurred her thoughts. Namusa waited, the boys at her table, homework strewn. Solani shared the shock, David alive in the restaurant. Namusa, her South African wisdom sharp, urged joining the Black women's support group, where Zolani had found solace after the accident. Digging out old photos, dust swirling in lamplight, Zolani confirmed the scar in a wedding snapshot, tears falling. 10 years of poverty, prejudice, and sacrifice, while he thrived. Namusa's tales of apartheid's pain fueled her. Chicago's skyline glowed outside, a city of secrets she'd unravel, her fight just beginning. Solani's fingers trembled as she sent the text, using Marcus Hale's number from the restaurant system. My place, 8 p.m. The apartment felt suffocating, Elijah and Lucas safe at Namusa's, their laughter a distant comfort. She paced the worn carpet, the creak of floorboards mirroring her racing pulse. David's return had shattered her fragile peace. The lie of his death a wound reopened. The knock came sharp, and she opened the door to him. David, cloaked as Marcus, in a tailored coat reeking of wealth, snow melting in his dark hair. He stepped in, scanning the threadbare couch, the boy's drawings on the fridge, his presence alien in her hard-won home. He sat, his familiar smile a mask, stirring memories of college love. His promises under starry skies, her at 22, pregnant, believing in forever. Zolani stood rigid, arms crossed, nails digging into her palms. David sighed, confessing the unthinkable. He'd staged the accident to escape $3 million in debts from failed real estate deals. A homeless man's body, bought from a morgue contact, was burned in a rigged car, dental records forged, and his wedding ring placed to seal the lie. Solani's stomach twisted. The image of that ring clutched through labor pains, now a cruel prop in his deception. He revealed more. The debt stemmed from an $8 million scam, targeting Black Chicagoans with fake condo promises, exploiting redlining's barriers. Families lost savings, homes, dreams, while he lived lavishly under a new name. He claimed it was to protect her and the unborn twins, but his eyes betrayed self-interest. Zolani's rage flared, her mind flashing to night-skipping meals for the boys, enduring racist slurs at work, patrons dismissing her as ghetto. He'd watched, he admitted, through investigators, ensuring their safety while doing nothing as she struggled. She exploded, pacing like a caged lion, her anger a torrent for the years stolen, Elijah's hospital bills, Lucas's tattered shoes. David offered cash, a thick envelope, promising to return, to rebuild their family. The gesture reeked of manipulation. She threw it back, bills scattering like ashes of their past. His face crumpled, a glimpse of the man she'd loved. But she saw only betrayal. She ordered him out, her voice steel despite tears, the door slamming shut on his retreating figure. Namusa appeared, sensing the storm, her embrace a lifeline. She shared stories of apartheid's injustices, families torn by greed, communities resilient against hate. Her words, laced with Zulu wisdom, urged Zolani to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for all David had wronged. As the city hummed outside, Zolani's resolve hardened. She'd protect her boys, expose his lies, and reclaim her power, no longer the widow of a ghost, but a warrior rising from the ashes. Zolani's resolve burned, but David's shadow crept closer. At school pickup, Lucas bounded out with a shiny skateboard, Elijah clutching a sleek tablet, gifts from a friend of Mom's. David's handiwork, his charm luring the boys. Her heart sank. He was manipulating their innocence, weaving himself into their lives. She confiscated the gifts, stashing them in a closet, but the boys' excitement lingered, their questions sharp. Elijah, ever perceptive, found an old photo in her closet, David's scar stark against their wedding joy. He confronted her, eyes searching, sensing the truth she dodged. Memories flooded, her at 22, alone after the accident, raising premature twins through grief-soaked nights. David's intrusion grew bolder, texting for a park meetup. Zolani agreed, driven by a need to gauge his intent, her vigilance sharp. At the park, autumn leaves crunched underfoot, David's Mercedes gleaming, a stark contrast to their old life. He played father, tossing a ball with Lucas, discussing books with Elijah, his gifts, more toys, sparking their joy. Zolani watched, arms crossed, her heart torn between their happiness and his deceit. The moment was shattered at the playground. A group of white parents blocked their path, one snarling, "You don't belong here." The slur cut deep, Elijah and Lucas freezing, confusion in their eyes. Zolani stepped forward, ready to fight, but David faltered, muttering excuses, pulling the boys away. His cowardice stung, echoing his abandonment 10 years ago. The boys' hurt was palpable, Lucas's energy dimmed, and Elijah's silence was heavy. Zolani held them close, fury rising. She sought refuge at the support group, the community center's basement warm with coffee and sisterhood. Sharing David's return and his scams targeting their community, she found strength in shared pain, evictions, prejudice, and resilience. The women urged action, their stories of overcoming systemic bias fueling her. A white parent's earlier jab at school, single black mom, bad influence, stung, but the group's solidarity lifted her. Namusa at home recounted apartheid's cruelties, her wisdom stealing Zolani. The boys slept, unaware of the storm, as she vowed to shield them, her fight now for justice, not just survival. Chicago's skyline a backdrop to her rising power. Zolani's determination crystallized in the wake of the park humiliation, a fire kindled by David's cowardice and the stinging prejudice that had marred the day. She couldn't let him slither back into their lives unchecked, poisoning the fragile peace she'd built for Elijah and Lucas. The support group's echoes still rang in her ears, sisters urging her to arm herself with knowledge, to strike back against the shadows of betrayal. With Namusa's encouragement, Zolani searched online during her lunch break at the Sapphire Room, her fingers flying over the cracked phone screen until she found Michael Grant, a private investigator specializing in financial fraud cases. His website promised discretion and results, his bio hinting at a personal stake in exposing scammers. She dialed his number, her voice steady as she scheduled a meeting, knowing this step could unravel everything, or arm her for the fight ahead. The office was in a nondescript building in the West Loop, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and the faint hum of traffic outside. Solani arrived early, her uniform swapped for a simple blouse and jeans, her heart pounding as she climbed the stairs. Michael Grant greeted her at the door, a mid-40s white man with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looking more like an accountant than a sleuth. He ushered her into a sparse room lined with filing cabinets and a board covered in photos and strings connecting clues, like a web of deceit waiting to be untangled. As she sat, Michael eyed her appraisingly, his initial skepticism evident in the slight furrow of his brow. "Mrs. Nkosi," he said, his tone professional but laced with an undercurrent of doubt that Solani recognized all too well. The subtle bias that colored interactions with black women like her, assuming they were dramatic or unreliable. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You say your dead husband is alive and scamming people? That's a tall tale. What proof do you have?" Solani met his gaze unflinchingly, pulling out the photo from her purse. The wedding snapshot where David's scar was unmistakable. She recounted the Sapphire Room encounter, the confession in her apartment, the staged accident that had left her a widow at 22, 8 months pregnant and drowning in grief. Michael's expression shifted as she spoke, the initial wariness giving way to intrigue when she mentioned the $3 million debt and the real estate scam targeting black communities. He jotted notes, his pen scratching against the pad, but Zolani sensed the lingering prejudice in his questions. "And you had no idea about his dealings? No red flags in the marriage?" It stung, implying she was complicit or naive because of her background, an echo of the systemic distrust she'd faced from banks denying her loans or employers questioning her qualifications. Yet she pressed on, her voice gaining strength, drawing from the well of endurance that had carried her through a decade of single motherhood. As the conversation deepened, Michael's demeanor changed. He revealed his connection. He'd been one of David's victims, investing his savings in a phantom Miami development. Losing everything, his house, his marriage, his kids' college fund. "Cole charmed me like he did everyone," Michael admitted, his voice bitter. "But when the deal collapsed, he vanished. I've been tracking him for years, following paper trails that went cold." Solani's story ignited something in him. The shared betrayal bridged the racial divide, turning his skepticism into alliance. He agreed to take her case pro bono, his eyes lighting with the fire of vengeance. "If Marcus Hale is David Cole, we'll prove it, and we'll bury him with the evidence." Their investigation began immediately. Michael pulled files from his cabinets, spreading bank statements and photos across the desk. What emerged painted David as a monster far worse than Zolani had imagined. Not only had he faked his death to escape the debt, but he'd built a new life on the ruins of others. The scam wasn't just $3 million. It was $8 million siphoned from 17 investors, families like Michael's, who trusted his glossy presentations. But the deepest cut came when Michael revealed a hidden layer. David had a secret child, an 8-year-old boy named Alex, born to a white mistress in Miami. Photos showed the child in a sprawling villa, swimming pools and private tutors funded by the stolen money, while Zolani's sons shared a bunk bed in their cramped apartment. The boy looked like Elijah and Lucas, same gold-flecked eyes, but lived in luxury, untouched by the poverty that had defined her family's existence. Zolani's breath caught, tears blurring the images. Betrayal upon betrayal. Not only had David abandoned her and the twins, but he'd started a parallel family, pouring resources into this hidden life while she scraped by on crackers and determination. The revelation gutted her, a knife twisting in old wounds. She remembered the early days after the accident, when she'd worked 3 jobs to afford formula, her body aching from labor and loss. David had watched, through investigators as he'd admitted, but chosen not to help, instead funneling funds to his secret son. The racial sting deepened. His mistress was white, their child shielded from the struggles black families faced, while Zolani battled redlining banks and racist employers. Michael's initial bias now fully dissolved. He saw her pain, his loss mirroring hers. "He's a sociopath," he said, handing her tissues. "But together, we'll expose him." They planned next steps: surveillance, records pulls, and a risky recording to catch David in a lie, Emboldened, Zolani arranged another meeting with David, this time at a neutral coffee shop near the park. She wired herself with a discreet recorder Michael provided, her heart pounding as she waited. David arrived fashionably late, his Mercedes idling outside, a symbol of the life he'd stolen. He slid into the booth, his charm on full display, but Solani saw through it now, the calculated warmth masking self-interest. As they talked, he slipped, revealing plans for a new scam, targeting her support group with investment opportunities in affordable housing, preying on the very women who'd lifted her. His words dripped with arrogance, oblivious to the device capturing every syllable. Solani feigned interest, her stomach churning, but inside triumph sparked. She had him on tape, a weapon forged from his hubris. The day took a darker turn when she returned home. Lucas had been at the playground with Namusa, his energy leading to a tumble from the monkey bars, a gash above his eyebrow needing stitches. Panic surged as Alani rushed him to Northwestern Memorial's ER, Elega trailing worriedly. The waiting room was a sea of faces, the air thick with antiseptic and anxiety. Benjamin Hayes, the doctor on duty, a late-30s white man with kind blue eyes and graying temples, called them in quickly. He examined Lucas with gentle efficiency, explaining each step to the boy, turning fear into fascination. "Scars tell stories," he said, stitching the wound neatly, his manner reassuring Zolani amid her fray. But the relief shattered when a white nurse, reviewing the chart, eyed Zolani suspiciously. "How did this happen exactly? We have to report if it looks like neglect, or worse." The implication hung heavy. A black mother accused of abuse, the bias blatant in her tone, assuming fault based on skin color alone. Solani's blood boiled, but Benjamin intervened, his voice firm. "That's uncalled for. Mrs. Nkosi is a devoted parent. This was an accident." He defended her, his support a rare allyship that warmed her guarded heart. As they left, Lucas, sporting a bandage and a brave smile, handed her his card. "Call if you need anything. For Lucas, or just to talk." His kindness lingered, a counterpoint to David's deceit, hinting at a future unmarred by betrayal. Back home, Namusa fussed over Lucas, her stories of resilience soothing the boys. Solani replayed the recording for Michael over the phone, the evidence mounting like a tidal wave. The secret child, the new scam plans. David's web was unraveling, and she held the thread. But the nurse's suspicion echoed the world's cruelties, fueling her fight. She wouldn't let David destroy more lives, especially not hers or her son's. The storm was building, and Zolani stood at its center, ready to unleash it. Zolani's alliance with Michael Grant deepened like roots seeking water in parched soil, each piece of evidence a brick in the wall she was building against David's deceit. The recording from their coffee shop meeting burned in her pocket, a digital dagger ready to strike. But David, sensing the noose tightening, struck first with a venomous precision that exploited the very system designed to fail women like her. It began with a knock at her door one rainy afternoon, two police officers standing there, their badges glinting under the hallway light like cold accusations. "Mrs. Nkosi," the lead officer, a white man with a mustache that hid his sneer, asked, "We have a report of domestic threats. Mind if we come in?" The words hit her like a gust of wind, knocking the air from her lungs. David had filed a complaint, painting her as a dangerous black woman, unhinged by grief, alleging she'd threatened him and the boys during their park outing. He leveraged the racist trope, the angry black mother, volatile and unfit, knowing the system would swallow it whole. The officers searched her apartment with cursory glances, their eyes lingering on the modest furnishings as if confirming some stereotype of instability. Solani stood frozen, her mind racing through the implications. Custody battles, social services scrutiny. The boys ripped from her arms. Elijah and Lucas watched wide-eyed from the kitchen table, their homework forgotten, fear etching lines on their young faces. "Mom?" Elijah whispered, his voice small, as the officers handcuffed her for questioning. The click of the cuffs echoed like a death knell, a symbol of how easily a black woman's life could be upended by a white man's lie. The ride to the precinct was a blur of sirens and shame, Zolani's wrists chafing against the metal, her thoughts a whirlwind of betrayal. David had weaponized the bias she'd fought her whole life, The assumptions that black mothers were neglectful, aggressive, unworthy. It reminded her of the nurse's suspicion at the ER, the parents' snide remarks at school, the daily microaggressions that chipped away at her dignity. At the station, the interrogation room was stark, fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees. The detective, another white man with a badge-heavy belt, leaned in. "Your ex says you're unstable, Mrs. Nkosi, threatening to keep the kids away from him. We see this a lot with folks in your situation." The pause before folks was loaded, implying poverty, race, single motherhood, all codes for suspicion. Solani defended herself calmly, explaining David's fake death, his scams, but her words fell on deaf ears, dismissed as the ravings of a scorned woman. They held her for hours, the temporary detention, a taste of the injustice that could swallow her whole. Word spread fast in her tight-knit community. Nomusa was the first to act, storming into the precinct with the fire of a woman who'd survived apartheid's brutalities. At 67, her small frame belied a lioness's heart. She'd rallied the support group, pooling resources for bail. Benjamin Hayes arrived soon after, his doctor's coat still on, having heard from a mutual contact at the hospital. He confronted the desk sergeant, his voice authoritative. "This is baseless. Mrs. Nkosi is a victim here, not a perpetrator." His defense cut through the bureaucracy, but not before he clashed with a skeptical officer who'd muttered about troublemakers. Benjamin's allyship shone, a rare bridge across racial lines, making Zolani feel seen in a way David never had. Together, Namus and Benjamin secured her release by evening, the bail money scraped from community donations, a testament to the network of black women who'd become her family. Back home, the boys rushed into her arms, their hugs fierce and frightened. "Why did they take you, Mom?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. Elijah, more perceptive, clutched her hand, his eyes searching for reassurance. Solani knelt to their level, fighting tears, explaining in simple terms. Some people lied to hurt others, and sometimes the world believed those lies because of how they looked. Nomusa, ever the wise elder, gathered them around the table with warm tea, weaving tales of her South African youth. "In apartheid," she said, her voice steady, "they took mothers from children for no reason but skin color. Police raids in the night, families torn apart. But we fought back, with love and truth. The stories painted vivid pictures. Townships razed, protests met with bullets, yet resilience blooming like wildflowers in cracked earth." The boys listened rapt, Elijah's brow furrowed in understanding, Lucas's energy subdued by the weight of it. Namusa's words weren't just history. They were a lesson in the injustice Solani faced daily, teaching the twins that their mother's arrest wasn't her fault, but a symptom of a broken system. It bonded them closer, the boys hugging Zolani tighter, vowing to protect her as she protected them. But the ordeal unearthed a deeper threat. As Zolani debriefed with Michael that night over a secure call, he revealed fresh discoveries from his digs. David had fabricated evidence implying she'd known about the scams from the beginning. Forged emails, doctored bank statements, suggesting transfers to her account. Lies designed to paint her as an accomplice, ensuring if he fell, she'd fall with him. The revelation sent chills down her spine. David wasn't just defensive, he was destructive, willing to drag her through the mud to save his skin. Panic gripped her, visions of losing the boys flashing like nightmares. Custody hearings where her blackness would be weaponized. Judges swayed by stereotypes, yet fear fueled her fire. "We need more," she told Michael, her voice resolute. "Bank records, witnesses, anything to prove his fakes." They intensified their efforts. Michael pulled strings with old contacts, unearthing wire transfers linking David to the Miami mistress and his secret son, funds siphoned from the $8 million haul. Zolani, meanwhile, scoured her records, old emails from their marriage, proving her ignorance of his schemes. She recorded another tense call with David, baiting him into admitting the forgeries, his arrogance slipping into confessions that sealed his fate. The collaboration with Michael blossomed into trust. His initial bias had vanished, replaced by admiration for her tenacity. "You're the key to this," he said. "Your strength will bring him down." As the chapter of this nightmare unfolded, Solani felt the tide shifting. The temporary detention had been a low blow, but it galvanized her allies. Namusa's community network, Benjamin's professional clout, Michael's investigative prowess. Benjamin checked in daily, his concern evolving into quiet support, a counter to David's chaos. The boys, enlightened by Namusa's stories, grew more aware, their innocence tempered by reality but not broken. Solani stood taller, her resolve unbreakable. David had underestimated her, thinking a black woman alone could be silenced. But she was no longer alone, and her fight was just beginning, a storm-gathering force ready to sweep away the lies. Solani's pulse thundered in her ears as she adjusted the hidden recorder beneath her uniform, the device a cold weight against her skin, courtesy of Michael's meticulous planning. The sapphire room buzzed with its usual evening elegance, crystal glasses clinking like distant bells, the low murmur of affluent conversations weaving through the air, scented with truffle oil and vintage wine. She had chosen this place deliberately, the site of her initial shock, now transformed into the arena for his downfall. At 32, after a decade of scraping by as a black single mother in a city that often viewed her as invisible or threatening, Solani felt a surge of power she hadn't known she possessed. The text to David had been simple. Sapphire Room, 8 p.m. Let's talk peace. He'd bitten, eager to reclaim what he'd abandoned, unaware of the trap snapping shut. She spotted him entering, his stride confident, coat draped over one arm like a cape of entitlement. Marcus Hale, David Cole, scanned the room, his eyes lighting on her with a mix of hunger and wariness. He approached the corner table she'd reserved, the one with the best view of the Chicago skyline, stars twinkling mockingly beyond the glass. Solani forced a smile, gesturing for him to sit, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation. The waiter, Maria, in on the plan, brought a bottle of Chateau Margaux, the same expensive red he'd ordered that fateful lunch. As she poured, her hands steady despite the storm inside, David leaned back, his posture relaxed, assuming victory. "I'm glad you called," he said, his voice smooth as silk. But Solani saw the cracks, the faint sweat on his brow, the way his fingers tapped the tablecloth. They exchanged pleasantries at first, Solani playing the part of the weary ex-wife open to reconciliation, her words laced with feigned vulnerability. She spoke of the boys' recent triumphs, Elijah's science fair win, Lucas's soccer goals, watching David's face soften with what looked like genuine longing. But it was a mask. She knew now the depth of his selfishness, the secret son in Miami living the life her twins deserved. As the main course arrived, seared salmon for him, a simple salad for her, a nod to her frugal habits, he broached the future. "We can be a family again, Solani. I've changed. The past is buried." The irony twisted in her gut like a knife. The past wasn't buried. It was alive, festering, demanding reckoning. With a deep breath, Solani set her plan in motion. She reached for the wine bottle, her fingers gripping it tightly, and accidentally knocked it over. The red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like blood from a wound, soaking into the fabric in fractured patterns that mirrored the shattered pieces of her life. David jolted, his napkin dabbing futilely at the stain. "What the—" But Solani's eyes locked on his, cold and unyielding. "Buried, David? Like you buried yourself 10 years ago? Or like the families you ruined with your lies?" The words hung heavy, the room's chatter fading as nearby patrons glanced over, sensing the tension. He paled, his mask cracking as she pulled out the folder Michael had prepared. Bank statements, witness affidavits, photos of his Miami villa, and the secret child. "You faked your death with a homeless man's body, forged dental records, and left your ring in the wreckage to fool me. All were to escape the $3 million debt from scamming black families out of $8 million. Redlining wasn't enough. You had to exploit it for profit." David's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his face draining of color. He tried to compose himself, leaning forward with a desperate whisper. "You don't understand. It was for us. For you and the boys. The investors were dangerous. They would have come after you." But Solani shook her head, her voice rising just enough to draw more eyes. "For us? While I ate crackers so the boys could have real food? While I faced slurs at work, denied loans because of my skin? You watched, David, through your investigators, and you did nothing. The accusation landed like a blow, and David recoiled, his charm evaporating into panic. He fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out his envelope, forged documents implying Zolani's complicity, altered emails suggesting she'd known about the deals, bank transfers doctored to show funds in her name. If I go down, you do too, he hissed, shoving them across the table. You're in this as deep as me. A black woman with a grudge? The courts will eat you alive. The threat was a masterstroke of manipulation, preying on the biases she'd battled. The assumption that she was guilty by association, her race a mark against her credibility. For a moment, doubt flickered in her chest. Visions of losing the boys flashing, social services swooping in, judges swayed by stereotypes. Her life dismantled once more. But Zolani had anticipated this. With a steady hand, she activated the playback on her phone, David's voice filling the space between them. The coffee shop confession, his casual admission of the new scam targeting her support group, his boasts about the faked death and the millions siphoned. I did what I had to, his recorded self said, damning in its arrogance. David's eyes widened, horror dawning as he realized the trap. He lunged for the phone, but Solani pulled back, her voice cutting through the growing murmurs around them. You thought you could buy us back with gifts? Exploit our community again? No more, David. Your empire ends tonight. The words echoed her inner triumph, a culmination of 10 years' pain transmuted into power. Chaos erupted as the FBI agents, tipped off by Michael and positioned discreetly at nearby tables, rose in unison. Badges flashed, voices barked commands. David Cole, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Patrons gasped, phones emerging to capture the spectacle. The silver-haired elite handcuffed, his face a mask of defeat. David struggled briefly, his eyes locking on Solani's in a final plea. Please, for the boys. But she stood unmoved, watching as they led him away, the door swinging shut on his lavish facade. Whispers rippled through the room. Some patrons, the racist ones who'd dismissed her before, muttered about troublemakers, and how did she pull this off? Their disdain stung, a reminder that victory didn't erase prejudice. But others, a few black servers in the back, even some open-minded diners, clapped softly, nods of respect acknowledging the underdog's win. Justice in that moment felt tangible, a balm on wounds long festering. Solani remained at the table, the spilled wine drying into crimson stains, her body trembling with adrenaline's aftermath. Maria squeezed her shoulder, whispering support, while the manager hovered, unsure whether to applaud or fire her. But Solani felt a profound release, the weight of 10 years lifting like fog burning off the lake. Namusa's words echoed in her mind, the strength of enduring, of fighting back. She'd protected her boys, avenged the scam families, and reclaimed her narrative. As the FBI wrapped up, Michael texted, "It's done. He's finished." Solani stepped outside into the night, the city lights a constellation of possibilities, her steps lighter, her spirit unbroken. The battle was won, but the healing had just begun. Solani stood outside the Sapphire room as the FBI van pulled away. David's silhouette a fading shadow in the rear window, his empire crumbling like the wine stain on the tablecloth inside. The Chicago night air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of rain on pavement, a cleansing she desperately needed. At 32, after a decade of carrying the world on her shoulders, she felt the first cracks in her armor, not of weakness, but of release. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her trembling, but it was a tremor of victory, not defeat. Michael Grant emerged from the chaos, his tired eyes alight with grim satisfaction. "It's over," he said, clasping her hand. "The FBI has everything. The recordings, the records. He'll pay." But Zolani knew the true cost wasn't just his. It was the scars on her family, the ones she now had to mend. The ride home blurred into a haze of streetlights and reflections, her mind replaying the confrontation. David's desperate pleas, the gasps from patrons, the satisfying click of handcuffs. Namusa waited at the apartment, the boys already in bed but restless, their intuition sensing the storm. Zolani thanked her neighbor with a hug, Namusa's embrace a fortress of warmth. "You did it, Mntwana Wami," Namusa whispered, her voice thick with pride. "Now heal." Alone with her thoughts, Zolani peeked into the boys' room, their small forms curled under blankets, innocent in sleep. Elijah's book lay open on the floor, Lucas's soccer ball tucked beside his pillow, reminders of the childhood she'd fought to preserve. But tomorrow she'd shatter their world with the truth, a necessary fracture to rebuild stronger. Dawn broke with a soft gray light filtering through the curtains, Solani rising early to prepare breakfast. The ritual an anchor in the turbulence. Pancakes sizzled on the stove, the aroma filling the apartment like a promise of normalcy. Elijah and Lucas shuffled in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their faces lighting at the treat. But Solani's heart ached as she sat them down, the words heavy on her tongue. She began gently, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. The man they'd met as Marcus Hale was their father, David Cole, alive all these years, having faked his death to escape his crimes. The boy's eyes widened, confusion giving way to shock. Elijah's logical mind pieced it together first. "So he left us? On purpose?" Lucas's energy deflated, his fists clenching. "Why didn't he come back? We needed him." The questions poured out, raw and unfiltered, their anger a mirror of her own suppressed rage. Zolani held them as tears flowed, explaining the scams, the abandonment, the secret life he'd chosen over them. He was selfish, babies, scared, but that doesn't excuse it. The boys raged, Lucas kicking his chair, Elijah retreating into silence. But Zolani guided them through it, drawing from the support group's wisdom. She took them there that afternoon, the circle of black women enveloping them like a protective cloak. Stories shared of fathers lost to incarceration, addiction, systemic traps. Helping the twins see their pain wasn't unique, but shared. Teaching forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. "Hold the anger," one woman advised, "but let it fuel your strength, not consume you." The boys listened, their small hands in Solani's, learning to release without forgetting, the group's empathy a balm on their wounds. Namusa, ever the matriarch, wasted no time organizing a community gathering that evening at the local center, transforming the basement into a haven of solidarity. Word had spread through whispers and texts, the arrest at the Sapphire Room, the unmasking of Marcus Hale as the scammer who'd preyed on their neighborhoods. Dozens arrived, black women from the group, families victimized by David's schemes, even a few allies like Michael, who stood awkwardly in the back. Namusa opened with a prayer in Zulu, her voice resonant, invoking ancestors' strength against oppression. Zolani stepped forward, her nerves steadying as she shared her story. The faked death, the decade of struggle, the revelation of his exploitation. "He targeted us because he thought we were weak," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "But look at us, surviving, thriving despite the red lines, the denials, the slurs." Murmurs of agreement rippled, women nodding, some wiping tears. One elder recounted losing her home to a similar scam, her voice cracking but resolute. Another, a young mother, hugged Zolani afterward. "You gave us justice." The empathy flowed like a river, washing away isolation, forging bonds stronger than blood. Namusa closed with a call to action, petitions against predatory lending, support for affected families, turning personal pain into collective power. Solani left feeling lifted, the weight shared, her spirit buoyed by the sisterhood that had become her true family. Amid the healing, Benjamin Hayes emerged as a quiet constant, his presence a gentle counterpoint to the chaos. He'd called daily since the ER visit, checking on Lucas's stitches, but now his concern extended to her well-being, a subtle shift that warmed her guarded heart. That night after the meeting, he arrived at her door with takeout from a local soul food spot, comfort in collards and cornbread. They sat on the couch, the boys asleep, and he listened as she poured out the arrest's aftermath. His eyes, kind and unwavering, held no judgment, only empathy. "You're incredible," he said, his hand covering hers. The touch sparked something long dormant, a flicker of trust, of possibility. Benjamin confessed his feelings then, his voice soft but sure. He'd fallen for her strength, her devotion to the boys, her unyielding spirit. "I want to be part of this family if you'll have me. Not to replace, but to stand beside you." He pledged support for her causes, donating to the Women's Fund, proving his allyship wasn't words but action. A white man choosing to bridge divides, to amplify rather than overshadow. Zolani hesitated, scars from David deep, but his sincerity pierced through, kindling hope. She leaned in, their kiss tentative yet profound, a promise of partnership built on equality. Justice formalized weeks later in a courtroom downtown, the air thick with tension as David stood before the judge, his tailored suit ill-fitting on his defeated frame. The prosecution laid out the case. Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, the $8 million scam exposed in damning detail, victims testifying to lost homes, shattered dreams. Black families from the community spoke, their voices resonant, painting David as the predator who'd exploited systemic racism for gain. Solani sat in the back, flanked by Namusa and Benjamin, her presence a silent accusation. The sentence came swiftly. 30 years in federal prison, assets frozen and auctioned, proceeds redistributed to the 17 victims. Cheers erupted from the gallery, a wave of vindication washing over Zolani. The money, her share modest but life-changing, meant security. Medical bills paid, a better apartment on the horizon. With the funds, Zolani orchestrated the move. A cozy 3-bedroom in a safer neighborhood, sunlight streaming through windows unmarred by bars. She reduced her hours at the Sapphire Room, reclaiming evenings for the boys. Homework help, soccer games, story time without exhaustion's shadow. For the first time in 10 years, she slept through the night, unburdened by the calculator in her head. The healing wasn't complete. Scars lingered, trust fragile, but it bloomed in small moments. Elijah's laughter freer, Lucas's energy channeled positively, Namusa's visits filled with joy rather than worry. Benjamin integrated seamlessly, his presence a steady light, teaching the boys chess while respecting their boundaries. Solani gazed at her new home, the walls echoing with life, feeling the profound relief of a woman who'd stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. The nightmare faded, replaced by the dawn of something real, something earned. 6 months had passed since the dramatic arrest at the Sapphire Room, a whirlwind of court dates, media scrutiny, and quiet reconstruction that reshaped Zolani's world like a sculptor chiseling marble from chaos. At 32, she stood in the modest community center hall, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows donated by local artists, casting rainbow patterns on the simple white dress she wore. It wasn't the extravagant gown of fairy tales, but one sewn by Nomusa's skilled hands, embroidered with Zulu patterns symbolizing resilience and renewal. Benjamin Hayes waited at the makeshift altar, his blue eyes shining with a love that had bloomed steadily, unforced, like spring after a harsh winter. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, graying temples adding a touch of wisdom to his kind face. The man who'd defended her in the ER, stood by her through the storm, and now vowed to build a future together. The ceremony was intimate, attended by the support group sisters, Michael Grant with a rare smile, and a handful of community members whose lives David's scams had touched. Elijah and Lucas, now 10 and growing taller by the day, stood as ring-bearers, their faces beaming with a joy unmarred by the shadows of the past. Namusa officiated, her voice resonant as she spoke of love not as a fleeting spark, but a deliberate choice, forged in trials like the apartheid fires she'd endured. "In my homeland," she said, her gray cornrows catching the light, "we say Ubuntu, I am because we are." Today, Zolani and Benjamin embody that. A family woven from threads of different colors, stronger together. Vows exchanged, rings slipped on fingers, simple bands etched with dates of rebirth. They kissed, the applause echoing like a collective exhale. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration of healing, a Black woman reclaiming her narrative from betrayal's clutches. Benjamin's commitment extended beyond the altar. In the weeks following the trial, he'd petitioned to adopt Elijah and Lucas, his paperwork a testament to his intent. The boys, after months of therapy sessions facilitated by the support group, had warmed to him gradually. Elijah appreciated Benjamin's patient explanations of science experiments, turning their kitchen into a lab of wonders. Lucas thrived under his coaching at soccer practices, the doctor's steady presence filling voids without erasing memories. The adoption hearing was emotional, the judge, a black woman herself, nodding approvingly as the boys testified. "He's like a dad who shows up," Lucas said simply, Elijah adding, "He chooses us every day." Papers signed, the family name blended, Nkosi Hayes, a symbol of unity across divides. Benjamin didn't replace David. He honored the space, teaching the twins that fatherhood was action, not biology. With the restitution funds from David's seized assets, a modest sum after legal fees, but life-altering, Zolani channeled her energy into a dream long deferred. She opened Ubuntu Eats, a cozy community cafe in the heart of the South Side, its walls painted in vibrant murals depicting African heritage and Chicago's Black history. The menu blended South African flavors from Namusa's recipes, injera, bobati, with American soul food staples, prices affordable for the neighborhood. But it was more than a restaurant, it was a hub for empowerment. Mornings hosted job training for single mothers, afternoons offered tutoring for kids like Elijah and Lucas, and evenings buzzed with support group meetings expanded to include anti-discrimination workshops. Solani hired women from the group, giving them shifts that fit around childcare, turning survivors into entrepreneurs. The grand opening drew a crowd, locals, former scam victims, even a few Sapphire Room regulars who'd witnessed the arrest and sought redemption. Namusa cut the ribbon, her eyes misty. "This is our victory," she declared, the aroma of spices wafting into the street, drawing in passers-by. The cafe became a beacon, its success rippling outward. Elijah and Lucas flourished there, helping after school, Elijah organizing the book nook with donated texts on Black history, Lucas greeting customers with his infectious grin. Inspired by Namusa's stories and their mother's ordeal, the boys joined a youth anti-bias program at school, leading discussions on prejudice. Elijah presented a project on redlining's legacy, his voice confident as he connected it to David's scams. Lucas organized a soccer tournament fundraiser for the cafe, inviting diverse teams to foster unity. Their growth was palpable, scars from the revelation fading, replaced by empathy and activism. "We're like superheroes," Lucas quipped one evening, flexing his muscles. Elijah nodded seriously. "Mom's the real hero." Solani watched them, her heart swelling, knowing the pain had forged their strength. Benjamin integrated seamlessly, his medical expertise aiding the community, free clinics at the cafe for asthma checks, echoing Elijah's needs. He supported Zolani's vision without overshadowing, a partner in every sense, their love deepening in quiet moments. Shared dinners where laughter drowned out past echoes, bedtime stories blending his tales of hospital heroes with her Zulu folklore. Namusa, the family's matriarch, moved into a small apartment above the cafe, her presence a constant thread of wisdom. Michael Grant stopped by occasionally, his own life rebuilt, sharing updates on the victims' recoveries. Homes repurchased, college funds restored. The restitution had healed wounds beyond her own, a ripple of justice in a sea of inequality. Evenings at Ubuntu Eats became family rituals, tables filled with chatter and warmth. One such night, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Zolani surveyed the scene, patrons savoring meals, children playing in the corner, Namusa regaling a group with stories. Benjamin wrapped an arm around her waist, the boys helping clear plates with giggles. The air hummed with life, a far cry from the isolation of her past. Challenges lingered, occasional racist comments online about the cafe, lingering doubts from David's shadow, but they paled against the solidarity she'd cultivated. Solani stepped outside, gazing at Chicago's glittering horizon, the city no longer a battleground, but a canvas of possibility. At 32, she'd transcended betrayal, prejudice, and loss, emerging not just whole, but radiant. Her family, blood and chosen, stood as testament. Love wasn't grand gestures or hidden luxuries. It was presence, choice, the daily act of showing up. In that moment under the stars, Zolani and Kosi Hayes felt truly free, her story a beacon for others navigating the darkness. As Zolani's journey fades into the Chicago night, her triumph over betrayal and prejudice leaves us with a powerful reminder. Resilience and truth can rewrite even the darkest chapters. What did her story stir in you? How do you face injustice in your own life? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your voice. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your presence means the world. Until next time, keep seeking justice and holding tight to those who show up for you.